Hi, thank you for joining me for this presentation on the impact of expressive art activity on trainee counsellors. I'll be summarising the key findings from the discussion. We'll look at both statistical and participant feedback and consider what it means for future research. Trainee counsellors face high levels of stress, self-doubt and burnout, which can impact their self-compassion and professional development. Art-based interventions have been explored as potential tools for enhancing emotional well-being, but their impact on self-compassion remains unclear. I wanted to explore something practical that might support trainee well-being. I've always had a personal interest in creative expression and the therapeutic potential of art, so I was curious whether something simple like drawing could support self-reflection and self-compassion in a meaningful way. So here's where everything came together. The study investigated whether engaging in expressive art activities during personal and professional development (PPD) sessions would improve self-compassion among trainee counsellors. Why PPD? Well, imagine being asked to open up emotionally and look competent at the same time. That's a tightrope many trainees feel they're walking. We hoped by bringing creative activities into it, it would make it more relaxed and less anxiety-provoking. Next, I'll walk you through how we structured the study. As you can see in the table, Group A took part in the intervention first. Group B did PPD as usual during this time, as we wanted to be able to investigate and compare the scores between both groups. Art intervention was carried out for 20 minutes before moving on to reflective discussion. Each week, the participants from both groups were invited to take part in completing the self-compassion scale. Although PPD is mandatory, students were reminded that they could stop participating at any time without any impact on their module credits. You'll notice the table shows two different art interventions. We'll explore that shortly, but first let's go to the hypothesis. The hypothesis was that there would be an increase in students' self-compassion levels after taking part in the intervention. Looking at research, we found the most successful art interventions for well-being were ones that had room for creativity while still having some structure. Ultimately, interventions that were not reliant on the participant already having artistic experience or skill. For Art Intervention 1, mandala templates were provided, along with blank sheets of paper. This gave participants choice to colour them in however they wanted, or if they preferred, they could copy the template designs or make up their own. For Art Intervention 2, participants were invited to take the line for a walk. They were given blank pieces of paper along with visual examples such as the image of the drawing here. They were encouraged to fill the page using a choice of pens, pastels and other materials, and then colour in or shade with different shapes. This activity was inspired by the artist Paul Klee, who used colour and line as a prominent theme in his work, and psychologist Margaret Nornberg, who used to encourage her clients to produce scribble drawings, which would then be analysed. The difference here was that the art interventions were for well-being, not a means for diagnosing anyone. Students were reassured that there was no right or wrong way to do these activities. A repeated measures ANOVA was conducted to examine the effect of time and group on self-compassion scores. While we didn't see statistically significant changes in self-compassion, there was a small upward trend, as you can see in the bar chart. In the art group, scores increased from a mean score of 2.60 to 2.73, and the PPD group increased from 2.89 to 3.04. This tells us something might be happening, just wasn't strong enough to register as significant within the short time frame and small sample. We will dive into the discussion of what this means shortly. I decided to analyse the data further by breaking down the subscale scores from the self-compassion scale. What's interesting is that within the subscales of self-compassion, common humanity and over-identification nudged upwards. That could mean participants were beginning to feel more connected or aware of shared struggles. But, and this surprised me here, mindfulness actually decreased slightly. One idea is that the reflective space might have led to more self-criticism than self-kindness, especially in trainees becoming more aware of their limitations. So, just to remind you, our hypothesis was that the expressive art activities would increase self-compassion scores. However, when we looked at the statistical analysis, the change wasn't significant. At first glance, that might seem disappointing, but if we take a closer look at the descriptive data, something interesting emerges. There was a slight increase in self-compassion scores in both groups, with the art group showing a marginally higher gain. Whilst this isn't statistically significant, it does hint at a potential trend that might be meaningful with a longer or larger intervention. Neff and her colleagues actually point out that self-compassion is something that builds over time. It's not always a quick shift. So it's possible that these short creative activities were starting to open up that door. Research by Slayton and colleagues also found the benefits of art intervention are often more qualitative. Things like insight, emotional release, or shifts in perspective, which might not always show up in numerical scales right away, especially after just a few sessions. One of the takeaways for me here is just because something doesn't score highly on a test doesn't mean it isn't doing something important under the surface, and that's worth exploring more deeply in future research. The results of the study open up some interesting areas for reflection, especially when we think about how trainee counsellors develop self-awareness and emotional resilience over time. This fits with theories like the Dunning-Kruger effect and the conscious competence model, which both suggest that as people become more self-aware, they often feel less confident. So ironically, they may have actually improved in insight but scored lower on self-compassion because they were more self-critical. Qualitative feedback gave the numbers more depth. Some students found the art grounding and calming. Words like relaxing, helpful, less anxious came up. Others struggled, some felt distracted or not particularly creative. This tells us personal preference and mindset play a huge role in engagement. Results suggest that differences in individual preferences or artistic confidence needs to be taken into account. These differences in attitudes may have influenced engagement levels, as previously mentioned, and subsequent self-compassion reflections. While art-based interventions have been shown to reduce stress and increase emotional resilience in some populations, research by Phillips and Becker suggests that engagement levels can vary significantly based on individual attitudes towards creativity. Research carried out prior to the study found that mandala creating was beneficial for well-being. So it could be that this sample of participants did not find the two art activities beneficial. The format of the art intervention group were given 20 minutes to do expressive art activities, and then the remainder of the class was used for PPD discussion. It could have been more beneficial for the participants if the art activities were merged with discussion throughout the full-hour class. This could have given the participants more time to get accustomed to the activities. The group-based setting may have introduced external variables that influenced outcomes. Social comparison and performance anxiety may have impacted how freely participants engaged with both the art and the group dialogue. The participants were in their first semester of the course, and so perhaps cautious to appear vulnerable or stand out. This may have influenced not only self-report scores, but also the perceived benefit of the sessions. One-on-one or small group interventions might foster a greater sense of safety, allowing participants to engage more authentically and reflectively. Furthermore, integrating mindfulness-based guided art tasks or providing more time for creative reflection may have improved engagement and allowed time for deeper emotional processing. Thinking about cultural differences, self-compassion can be interpreted in different ways. Some research suggests that self-compassion in collectivist cultures is conceptualized differently. For example, practices like self-kindness or self-encouragement may be interpreted as self-indulgent. Similarly, findings from Lopez and colleagues highlight that individuals in Western cultures, particularly students, may struggle to distinguish between self-compassion and self-indulgence, leading to lower scores as they engage more critically with themselves. This is especially true in educational settings, where perfectionism is often valued and emotional expression can be perceived as vulnerability. Different interpretations will have affected the way participants complete the scale questions, and this therefore raises concerns about whether this scale fully represents self-compassion dynamics in diverse student populations. This also made me reflect on how we define what's expressive. One person's safe space is another's discomfort, which is why future interventions might need to be more flexible or tailored. The original self-compassion scale was developed and validated primarily in Western, individualistic cultures, where self-compassion is often viewed as a personal trait. Studies have shown that in collectivist cultures, self-compassion may function differently. Plus, the self-compassion scale short form, whilst more ethical and manageable for students, might have missed more nuanced shifts. In future, scales like the fears of compassion or forms of self-criticism scale could add more depth. Or looking at a wider perspective of well-being, the psychological well-being scale could give a more general and insightful view. Limitations include small sample size, missing data, personal attitudes towards art, and limitations with the self-compassion short form. Whilst the findings weren't statistically significant, they still highlight important trends and contextual factors, and I'll now explore how these might shape future research and intervention design. Going forward, it might be worth comparing structured art guidance against free expression, and maybe combining the art and PPD discussion more fluidly instead of splitting them. Also, maybe self-compassion isn't the only or best outcome measure. Maybe it would be more effective to look at stress, resilience, or emotional awareness in the short term. Capturing wider qualitative feedback could also help shape future practice of trainee counsellors. The findings of this study indicate that self-compassion development is complex and may require longer interventions or alternative measures to capture meaningful change. So to conclude, although personal growth is rarely linear, by refining intervention methods, utilising mixed methods research, and expanding the scope of outcome measures, future studies can provide a more comprehensive understanding of the role of expressive arts in enhancing self-compassion among trainee counsellors. Thank you for listening to this presentation.